dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth, man mastered the mammoth and horde.
I was listening to somebody discussing the other day the idea that the making of an album is not only a passion project, but also detrimental to success. So I thought today, despite the amount of people who are messaging me, asking me to talk about politics, I mean, come on now. Every day is an absolute headfuck when it comes to politics. I'm just like everybody else, I think, and just becoming absolutely bewildered and confused. So let's just stick to music. Just the idea of where the album came from, and is it true? Is it detrimental to success? Of course, my fellow artists, you know, we're going to keep making albums, so take that as a given, but we're going to have a little discussion. Well, me and the other members of my grey matter living inside my aging skull. All right, let's get into it. Agitators Anonymous, episode, who knows? Who can tell? Who cares? Something or other. Let's do it. So before we get into the episode, as ever, the podcast is sponsored by Metal Blade Records, the home of Primordial. So you can go to www.metalblade.indiemerch.com, INDIE, metalblade.indiemerch.com, and you can use the code AA2024, and then you type 10% off, and you can get 10% off your order. It is the home of Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, Cannibal Corpse, Fate's Warning, Merciful Fate, Primordial, tons and tons of bands, Sirith Ungol. The list is endless. Times are tough, and that 10% off can mean an awful lot. And this is the only metal label that is still independent. Right then. Now, back to the episode. A little bit of housekeeping before that, and that is that Primordial has announced a show in Dublin on October the 18th with, from Scotland, Sair. Quite a few other bands, I think, to be announced. And it sort of feeds into the general topic of conversation today. And that is we are going to be playing a couple of albums in their, I think, their entirety, or maybe almost their entirety. And they are Spirit the Earth the Flame, which is 25 years old. The Garthing Wilderness, which is 15? No, it must be 20 years old. I've forgotten. And To the Nameless Dead, which is, I don't know. People seem to celebrate the birthday of any record. It's 14 years since this, that, and the other. So it's something like those things. Now, as you've probably heard me discuss perhaps on the podcast before, fundamentally I used to be against those things because it's really an indication of the fact that people are not really paying attention or caring to the new music that you're making. But the parameters of that discussion, even compared to 5 or 10 years ago, have changed drastically. And it just is what it is. The reason I'm sort of going to try and discuss this today is because we were in rehearsal with Primordial a couple of months ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was just saying, like, this is a classic argument that I imagine is happening in rehearsal rooms all across the world, among, let's say, musicians of a certain vintage, or, you know, middle-aged musicians, bands with semi-careers, because don't forget, much like greater society, the last 10-15 years have seen a sort of hollowing out of the middle class, where rich people get richer, and you take this in a musical context, and bands who never made a living or have never had any chance of making a living will use the instruments and the platforms and the algorithms of, for example, Spotify, to try and move up, to get some attention. Whereas those of us in the middle who perhaps once upon a time would have made it out of the small aperture, out of the gates, into maybe having some kind of a potted career, we find those, the ability to do so much and much reduced. So the middle class, the kind of middle bands are being squashed, and the bands at the top, the small percentage, who are able to just keep increasing their festival fees, despite subjective popularity, but they're just classic bands now. They can keep on doing the same thing. So it's really about this sort of squeeze nature of this, the middle class of the music industry. But we were having this discussion, and that was basically about the last Primordial album, how it ends, which, in hindsight, we should have kept several songs back from and released them as singles, but it's too long. And if you look at the streaming numbers, you will see track 1 starts out of the gate. Let's say, for argument's sake, 250,000 streams. By the time you get to track 7, it's down to 40 or 30 maybe. So what that means is that even among fans of the band, many people don't get to song 7 or 8. And what does this really say to us? There's an interesting discussion in I was listening to, and that was, I forget her name, but a female musician from London. Her name might come to me. Kate Nash, I think. I don't know anything about her music, but what she was saying resonated a little bit with me. She was saying that the overheads for touring have now become so great that touring is like a loss leader. You're losing money on it now. If you want to bring a proper production, and I'm going to read you out a reply and a comment I made on YouTube to another artist. It's not something I do very often. I tend to not comment on forums, not comment on really anything much. A couple of times on a Manchester United forum. Oh yeah, yep. Man United fan since 1983 for my sins, but that's, a little football aside. But I generally tend to steer clear of arguing on forums or getting into debates with people, or I just haven't got the energy or the time, especially not in the last 10 years. Maybe before that, in the old Facebook days when we were young and idealistic and thought that arguing over the internet could change somebody's mind or opinion. But arguing about politics is like dancing about architecture, as the famous quote is, or maybe it's just famous within my head. But the point of what Kate Nash, I think, was saying, I've no idea, as I said, what her music sounds like, was that she can get booked for festivals. She has enough of a career and a body of work behind her to be booked for festivals, go and travel with her band, much like Primordial, make a few pounds like that. Admittedly, even for greater fees now than you had 5 years ago or pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, you're often making less money because all of the overheads are greater. As an example, Primordial is playing a gig at the end of August, and just in Europe, I'm not going to say which country, because then you're going to start perhaps doing your own research, and then hit me up in the comments going, no, you got it wrong, you need to use this platform. But we had a look around. And to travel from one European capital back home to Dublin on a direct flight on a Saturday afternoon was €695 without luggage. Multiply that by 5. And before you know it, traveling can take up a huge portion of your fee. But you've heard me give out about that before. It's not what I'm going to try and discuss here. What I am saying is that the overheads involved in touring, and even for the first tour we did after lockdown ended with Swallow the Sun, which is right at the end of COVID, which was a reasonable success because I think everyone wanted to get out. We were one of the first tours to kind of head out after lockdown. And among the people who wanted to come out, there was a great sense of relief. But then as the floodgates open and everybody is just on tour now and everybody's just constantly out there because it's the only way really to try and make day-to-day money. What has happened, I think, is something you probably could have put a bet on, but that is that festivals where you have a 45, 50, 60-minute playing slot, you don't really play obscure songs, new songs. You play maybe one new song, 2 new songs. I can see it with the Primordial festivals. Already now we are 2 or 3 years since 2 years on since the last album, and slowly the new songs get dropped and dropped. Because, I understand it. When you went to see Motorhead or, Slayer, did you want to hear 6 new songs? You didn't. And we have to acknowledge that we've moved into that kind of last few chapters of our career and that people want to hear what they consider the classic songs. So what happens is that because touring has become so expensive and the overhead's so great, gas costs, van costs, as this Kate Nash artist, woman was explaining, and I agreed with her. She was saying what happens is that it demeans and belittles the album because you just don't get out to tour like you did before, so people don't get to see the club show where you play as much of the album. Of course, there are the Rotting Christs and the Vaders and the Marduks for whom this is still what they do. But for an awful lot of bands, they just want to go in, play the festival, get out. And there is a financially viable way to do that as a mid-sized band. You're making probably less money than you were 5 years ago, and also you're not selling any merch. The merch sales at festivals are really down. So you're in this kind of catch-22 situation because you're really touring to sell merch. But of course, numbers for touring are down because everyone is trying to do the same thing. But what happens is that the artistic nature of the album, that great thing that you've crafted and honed over months, and I was going to say don't get me wrong, but I'm not saying that Primordial is not going to make more albums or another album or something like this, but an album is a great undertaking and months of work where we have spent hours, if not days, poring over the track listing and, trying to get the sequencing right, trying to get what in my head would be what opens side B, how do we finish? Opening side B is Praise of Death. The last song is Hardening the Arteries. Hardening the Arteries, what a strange song. That is a death metal song, is it not? Hello Eights could be black metal, couldn't it? I mean, it really could. It's a black record. It's a dark record. But something about Hardening of the Arteries, it's such a cold, harsh song. I digress. But what it means is that slowly but surely the album becomes sort of obsolete. Of course, not amongst, us, the committed, the passionate, the people who still collect vinyl. But I guarantee you, if you're like me, you have a pile of vinyl sitting somewhere in your, in your vicinity, which is yet to be listened to. And because you're sitting there listening to my dumb voice, which also is a thing. But what Kate Nash was saying, and I thought, yeah, you're right, is that we can roll along with festival culture, but slowly or surely it's making distant friends, distant cousins, not seen relatives of some of the songs on an album. It's making songs that really should be worth more. Now, I always think to myself, I'm not someone who really enjoys being in the studio that much. I like spontaneity. I like traveling more than I like the spontaneous nature of playing live more than meticulously crafting. It's not my style. If you've seen me play the bass, you will absolutely understand that. And so playing live is the reward for the patience you have to exert in the studio. Of course, I do enjoy being in the studio, but it's not my favorite thing. And so there are songs I can think of off the top of my head Where Greater Men Have Fallen. Come the Flood, for example, is one of our favourite songs, but I don't think we ever got to play it properly live. And you only really know the worth of a song when you road test it, when you take it out there and it becomes a favourite song. It becomes something special. It takes on a different nature live. And this is becoming something that's being reduced in terms of art, in artistic terms, and as a band. And so what you end up doing is you end up kind of playing the hits. Songs go missing, deep cuts. We were supposed to, before COVID hit, play Songs from the Wilderness, a whole tour of songs that we never play live. And I really liked the idea, and we started to rehearse it. And then, of course, COVID and lockdown happened, and that was the end of that. And we never quite picked up the thread because life just seemed to be hurtling quicker and quicker. But the Songs from the Wilderness idea, and I think an awful lot of bands feel like this, you put so much effort into making an album. But it's clear, as I've used the example of this Ukrainian band I really enjoy, SVRM. It's clear, as I said, they've just released another EP. Now, at some stage, and maybe with this new one, I kind of went, yeah, okay, maybe a bit too many EPs. But this is how they've built an audience. And the fact is that for some people, they realized, and let's consider this in mainstream terms. The biggest selling album of last year appears to have been Taylor Swift. Physical copies with 1.9 million sold for Taylor Swift, which is insane. Sorry for mentioning the name. And Ed Sheeran clipped over that with 1.1 million. And there were days when a hit artist would be selling that in a week, but they are long gone. Of course, metal and rock music is seen as an anachronism by the rest of the music industry. And it's very odd that music almost has gone back to where it was in the 1950s or the early 1960s, where it was about the single. And those early Beatles albums were just compilations of singles. It was about the single. It wasn't until the 1960s, you'd say the mid to late 1960s, where album artists were born. And that's kind of, where most of us have grown up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s around the nature of the album. These life-defining albums, whether they're the Smiths or Nine Inch Nails or New Model Army or all these kind of bands. We think back of classic albums. Only last weekend we were arguing about Beneath the Remains versus Arise. But this is kind of not the way things are going now. If you want to build a career, it would seem that making an album is almost detrimental, because a lot of people don't actually get to listen to, they don't have the temperament or the attention span to get to song 6, 7 or 8. And therefore songs just kind of go missing from your album. So maybe it's better to just have Hate über alles Creator as your new modern hit and then back it up with a kind of an EP. But this is not what labels want, because labels still want the big streaming moment of an album. They want that spike and they want that thing to promote. And so many metal bands are caught in a kind of between a rock and a hard place, if we consider things like, and I hate to use the word, but popularity. The problem here is you're in a catch-22, is that Primordial sits usually between 30 and 40,000 monthly Spotify listeners. And I do hate to, my hands feel grubby mentioning these things. But the problem is that if you do want to travel and play festivals, and you do want to say, hey, you can't pay us the same fee as you did 6 years ago because, hey, inflation, hey, cost of living crisis, hey, we deserve more, hey, we've moved into legacy territory, hey, the cost of gas to the bloody airport is more expensive. They can just look at your monthlies and go, yeah, but you don't seem as popular. So this is the catch-22. This is the argument that me and Kieran in the rehearsal room were having. I was going, well, and he's right. He sticks to his guns. He says we shouldn't compromise. We shouldn't be the band that releases random singles of new music. And I would say, well, I understand that, but we have to play the game a bit. And it gives me no pleasure in saying that. Although at the same time, what the game might be, let's say you were to take, I don't know, a couple of old traditional songs and rework them into soundscapes, that could be a challenge and also something interesting. It doesn't have to be a negatory. It doesn't have to be something negative. But at the same time, you are playing the game, because at the end of the day, you are still being paid to go and travel to play in a festival in another country. And if, for argument's sake, like Rotting Christ, who played the game very well, as you've just noticed, they just released a 35-year retrospective sort of video in a Greek amphitheatre. It looks amazing. And you think to yourself, if I think back to where Rotting Christ were in 1999 or 2000 or 2001, that was certainly not on the cards. So a wonderful regeneration of their career. But part of that regeneration is playing the game. And that's also why they have young fans, as opposed to some bands who now you go and play a show and you go, God damn, everyone here is 50. Go to a Rotting Christ show, it won't be like that, because they have managed to reinvent themselves to a percentage, 10, 20%, to a younger audience who are super into the new songs. Maybe Creator is the same. So there's an uncomfortable piece to be sought between not compromising and doing something to keep the name in circulation, let's say. Because if you look back at, say, the Hammerheart Records days of the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a whole host of bands who were kind of at the same level, and some have done very well in managing that career, and some bands less so, if you compare a Septic Flesh to an Eternus. No offense to Eternus, just made a very good new album, but considering how great their records were in the 90s, you thought maybe, they should have some more stats to back that up. So you see my point. There is a complication there, and what it does is it ultimately belittles, that's the wrong word, besmirches the artistic nature of the album, because what it is all pointing to is, don't bother making an album, hey? make a bunch of singles, and just keep spiking the algorithm and keep moving along. And also it gives people the time to go, oh, a new Primordial song. And who knows, maybe it's a banger, maybe it's a hit, maybe it's one with a cool video, and then it becomes a staple of your live set, and everybody's heard it. Whereas if you hit them with 8 new songs, it can get lost. So you can see where the conundrum is. And also, interesting things you've noticed on Spotify. Go to your Spotify, just go to your Spotify and look and see how difficult it is to get to your artists. Everything else is in the way first. Curated playlists, your daily mix, your this, that, the other, songs by people. Now, of course, I'm listening to Dark Angel, Darkness Descends today in the gym. I'm listening to some Chrysian. I'm listening to some Morbid Saint, Spectrum of Death, this kind of thing. And so my daily mix will throw at me songs from those. But for people who like pop music and kind of stuff like that, they are in the main general curated playlists. And because playlists have what come to dominate mainstream music, of course, people want to write music that is like what is in the playlists. Poorly explained, I know. Apologies for that. My brain is, not firing. The synapses are not all firing today. But what you see, how hard it is to get to your artists. Remember when you had an iPod and you just would scroll through and go, you know what? I'm really feeling like I need to hear Overkill, Feel the Fire today. Brilliant speed metal record, by the way. And you put it on and you played it and you weren't distracted. But now on your phone, you're playing Spotify. But that also means you've got your phone in your hand. So you're playing something, then you're distracted by something else, and you've got a voice note from somebody. Then you're watching a reel, and you know how it goes. You're distracted from the undertaking, which is to listen to the new Primordial, how it ends, to give it 74 minutes of your life. And we made a mistake. We should have kept back 2 songs to release as singles. And perhaps one of those songs, which is now 7 or 8, let's say All Against All, which I think is a great song, could be a song that live makes sense. But sadly, All Against All may never make the live set. I don't know. And the truth is that some of those songs were written very close to recording the album. I've only sang some of those songs 2, 3, maybe 4 times, and then the song is gone. Just like a sort of shooting star or something. Well, that's the romantic in me coming out. You just see it for a moment and then it's sort of gone, and you can't help but have a feeling of ennui. Ennui, that's an interesting word, isn't it? Doesn't it translate as soul sadness or something like this? Anyway, you just realize that a song like Come the Flood is just kind of gone forever, and you have to accept that because things are just rolling and moving at a much quicker rate. And so trying to take the time with a song just seems very difficult. It doesn't feel like that for me with To the Nameless Dead or The Garden Wilderness. It feels like every song has been lived in, like an old pair of comfy shoes that, you've worn in, that you put on every now and again. You go, these ones, I can run faster in these ones. This is perhaps for the first album that we haven't considered properly yet a headline tour for the new album with new songs. The last collection of shows that we did around Germany, I can say, being honest, weren't that great. Yes, some were in poor locations, some were last moment additions, and that maybe 10 or 12 or 14 years ago you had to worry about a bit less, and you knew 300 people would show up. They didn't do badly, but they didn't fill us as a band with the promise of, you know what, we need to get back out in the van and go and play 2 hours 45 and go back and do a headline tour. And so we returned to the idea from the other week, which is the concept of the underground or the metal scene, the traditional metal scene, in a state of managed decline, because it's still tethered to these ideas, and that is making an album tethered to the classic ideas of them, that were once staples within the music industry. And I don't mind. Let's go down with the ship together. And the idea of just being a cynical singles band, is not something I want to subscribe to. But at the same time, as I said, the catch-22 situation of playing the game a little bit. So like I said, I don't often comment on other people's pages or forums. I kind of don't see the benefit of that. and I would encourage, if it's something you do all the time, get a hobby. Go out and run around or play football or something. It's just a hiding to nothing, especially about politics and stuff. But this woman called Mary Spender, she has 760,000 subscribers on YouTube. I just came across her page, not because of the music, I don't have any interest in that, but her quite succinct and well-rounded opinions about the music industry, sometimes quite interesting. But she did she did a YouTube video about how much money I lost on tour, and it was like minus 12,000 sterling. Now, one of the things I found very interesting about this is that her 760,000 subscribers and right now 300,000 views on this particular YouTube video that I commented on translated to between, it would seem, 40 and 150 people coming to her shows. And that I thought was very interesting and very telling, in that you've probably noticed lately there are tours going round. I think there's one at the moment with Ola Englund, the guy who does the guitar channel on YouTube, some Charles Berthold or something, some bass guy. You've all seen it, the bass guy doing this is insane stuff. And some other guy. And between them, they literally have millions and millions of people view them and follow them. And I watched a video of one show on YouTube. I mean, not much of it, but a bit. And it looked like there was about 250, 300 people there. Maybe the tour is done pretty good, but it seems to me that there is an absolute disconnect between people, between something that does very well on YouTube and the idea of getting those people off their couch to come and see you play a show. I know that there is a show coming up in Dublin, Miracle of Sound or something. I mean, look, Miracle of Sound is a very strange name. Sounds like something from the 1950s, but far be it from me to, well, look, whatever. And you will wonder, does the YouTube audience translate to a crowd? Now, seemingly not, but Mary Spender's video is pretty interesting, and what she's outlining is very traditional means of putting a tour together and all the rehearsal and all that kind of thing. And maybe go and have a look at it. But I replied to it, and I'm going to try and go through my comments just to maybe end off this whole thing, because I think it pertains to this idea that the harder and harder touring gets, the less and less those of us who are real fans are going to get to see our deep cuts. We're just going to get to see, oh, it's them. And when we stand at a festival and go with the beer in our hand and go, yeah, that was pretty cool. We got to hear Empire Falls and Coffin Ships, but where's this, and this? And I said to her to be very brutal about it, and please don't be offended, you know, as anybody, all of you will know me. It says, not in my wheelhouse to seek to offend. If you wanted to make money and not lose, you needed to hire musicians at a lower daily price. Now, what she was doing was hiring local musicians in sterling at expensive rates. Now, of course, I'm a musician, and what I'm actually arguing for on her behalf is the ability for her to be able to make the tour happen. But yet at the same time, the disconnect here is that for her to make this tour happen, she has to try and find a cheap option to make it work. So that itself is to the detriment of local musicians, because my advice would be maybe up and coming or people working for lower euro rates from Euro states, in brackets. Sounds awful, but true. And what I mean by that is, if you are desperately seeking a drummer for something that you're doing, I know Gamma Bomb have been in this situation, you can hire somebody from Poland who will know your stuff inside out and show up and play for 150 euro a day. Sounds bad, but that's kind of how it is. It's still money and an economy to a musician, you know, and you're able to go out and tour and play the songs, but you're not paying a local musician 300 euro per day. And that is, in case you did not realize, for crew and standing musicians. For crew nowadays, when you see a front of house or a lighting person, they're very often charging 300 euro a day. Musicians can be, you know, 250, 300, 350, 400. So I said to her, well, maybe find a cheaper option who are playing with you. And musicians who will come and nail it on day one and don't need more than a day of rehearsal. Because she had a week of a week of rehearsal booked from what I could see on a sound stage. This was something that used to be done in the old days. And we had a famous one here in Ireland, Windmill Lane, which is where AC/DC, I think, recorded The Razor's Edge. And big bands would hire out an entire venue on the soundstage, and they would try and put up their stage show, and they would get in their desk, and they would just play and record their live show for like a week when you had the money to do that kind of thing. That is a luxury now. And what you need is musicians who are going to come in and go, I know all of these songs, and they nail it first, second go. Dread Sovereign just did that with Big Kev, the drummer of Destroyer 666 and guitar player of Sepulchre and all this kind of stuff. Johnny from Conan couldn't do the last few gigs we did, and he just showed up literally on the day. We went through the set twice, bang, he's in. And that also is something that needs to happen if you're going to be able to make it. You can't take a week of rehearsal, because that's also a week off everybody's jobs, because you're probably not a full-time musician. And so you see how the problem is that to make it work, you have to cut down on all the things that allow everyone the ability to make a living. And that returns us back to the Spotify discussion and what it's done to the music industry. And that is to basically cut all of the potentials for many people to be musicians. So you need musicians to nail it on day one. Don't need more than one day of rehearsal. Cut all crew costs. Yeah, unfortunately, this is what I said to her. Cut all the crew costs and use local front of house. Don't bring a front of house with you, because what often happens, even we've had the same situation with Primordial, and you want your own front of house out there because you want somebody on your team out the front. Because don't forget that you go and see a band and they sound like crap. It's sometimes, of course, it's the amps and the playing and all this kind of stuff, but generally that's not the band's fault. What they hear on the stage is different to what they're hearing through the monitors at the front, they're hearing through their in-ears, they're hearing through their amps. It's not the same as what you are hearing out the front. And you need somebody usually in your, on your team going into bat. But, go back to what I just said a few minutes ago, a €695 single flight back from one capital city to another, to Dublin. Now, that's the same for the front of house. And they're also being paid their fee per day for working. And then their travel for 2 flights. So bringing your own front of house could cost you €1,200 for one show. So I said to her, don't bother bringing the front of house, or take some of the music off backing tapes. The music was quite sort of acoustic, indie kind of stuff. But I did say this: what is hard to correlate is the seeming mismatch of your online presence to the size of venues. Are the people there coming to see you going to think any less of the music if you only have a drummer and the rest from backing tracks? Now, I wasn't trying to be offensive there, but I was trying to say, especially for these YouTubers, is that really what they're coming to hear, like a full band? Why change your vision? Of course, perfectly understood. Facebook targeted ads are totally pointless in 2024. Yep, they absolutely are. Facebook ads, I don't know. I mean, I know people in labels and people in bands who do them, and they get not a single click through. So I think people really have to think about targeted ads, because everything is targeted ads. If you're putting targeted ads through Instagram and paying per day, are they really getting to the people they need to get to? Or are people just scrolling past them because it's like every other fucking ad, where 3 out of every 4 posts now is an ad? Facebook ads, targeted ads, I mean, do they work? I really don't think so. I don't think they get any click-through. And I said, an external promo. What is external promo anymore? I mean, I just went to the gym and there's a big electronic screen at the end of the hallway, and somebody was advertising their album. Some guy, and it's just a picture of his album. Out now where? There was no QR code, there was no scanning thing, there was no link. And I thought, here's somebody who's still living in 1994. Good year, why not live there? But I realised that for her, a well-shared 15-second trailer among your fans should have done it, I said it. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but it seems to be a better idea than targeted Facebook ads, where you can also perhaps have sold some sponsorship through those trailers or offset things with the grim reality of VIP meet and greets with superfans. Primordial will never ever do a VIP. Imagine paying to meet me. Jesus, what the fuck? That's what a scar across anyone's soul to have to do that. Primordial will never do that, but a lot of bands do, and this offsets the costs of, for example, this woman is a YouTube star. We use that word in a broad context, but maybe you can do people pay an extra 10 quid to come in and watch the sound check or something like this, to take part in a live Q&A for your channel. Yeah, that seems like a good idea, right? Book more dive bar venues if you expect 150 people than a salubrious 450 size town hall, and bring down hire costs. Another way to bring down tour costs, unfortunately, is a buy-on. Opening bands buy on to a tour. We're discussing that only last weekend about Alcest, for example. Huge crowds with Alcest. You want to buy onto the tour. In the old days, you picked your tour supports because they reflected well on you. This is always what Primordial did, you wanted to make the experience good for the fans, and you wanted to say, okay, we're going to bring Rome. Let's have Swallow the Sun. Let's Svarta Dowdy. But as time progresses, very often what tour agencies are doing are going, well, you want to support X band, it's €300 or €400 a day. And so the opening two bands, if you've been to, I don't know, a Marduk show and you've seen two bands and you go, who the fuck is this band? They're paying onto the tour, which is paying €200, €300, €400 a day, and that covers the bus. So the bus cost. So then you're not loss leading. You're paying for the bus per day, and this allows the tour to happen. Anyway, talk to a local music shop who can perhaps supply a backline for an ad on the channel right here. Have a support band buying onto the shows at £100 or £100 or £150 per day, and use that as the per diem. She was giving her musicians £40 a day per diem. A per diem is the money you get to spend every day on food. Touring now compared to 5 years ago is by magnitude times more expensive, and unfortunately to break even you need to cut out the luxuries. I'm not sure why exactly I read that out, but I just thought it was interesting considering where I started this podcast, which is the idea that your album tour has now become a passion project, a loss leader, and the way the music industry has become set up, things are stacked against that piece of art, and I think that's sad and unfortunate. I'm not going to subscribe to doing it myself, but you really wonder where it's going to position things in 4 or 5 years, especially because I don't see anything coming up and challenging Spotify. And once the deep fake Spotify gets a handle on making its own ginger and knock loose and slaughter to prevail and trigger the bloodshed, you're going to have those bands competing with AI versions of the same thing. Maybe it's better to live in 1994. Anyway, my friends, the album is a passion project. I didn't get around to saying that the phonograph was invented by Thomas Edison in the year 1877, and Alexander Graham Bell's Volta Laboratory. But I'll leave you with this, and I found this quite interesting before I disappear, and that is the early phonographs. Let's leave you with this, and I'm sure this man had a majestic moustache. The phonautograph was invented in March the 25th, 1857 by Frenchman Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville, an editor and typographer of manuscripts at a scientific publishing house in Paris. One day, while editing Professor Langier's Traits de Philosophy, he happened upon that customer's engraved illustration of the anatomy of the human ear and conceived of the imprudent idea of photographing the word. Think about that. Photographing a word. In 1853 or 1854, he began working on Le problème de la parole s'écrivant elle-même. The problem of speech writing itself. Think about that in a modern context. This is 1854. Aiming to build a device that could replicate the function of the human ear. Scott coated a plate of glass with a thin layer of lamp black. Not sure what that is. He then took an acoustic trumpet and at its tapered end affixed a thin membrane that served as the analogue to the eardrum. At the centre of that membrane, he attached a rigid boar's bristle, approximately a centimetre long, placed so that it just grazed the lamp black. As the glass plate was slid horizontally in a well-formed groove at a speed of 1 meter per second, a person would speak into the trumpet, causing the membrane to vibrate and the stylus to trace figures that were etched into the lamp black. There you go. Every day is a learning day, my friends. Just a discussion of the album and how the modern music industry has relegated it to second-class status. And what a deep shame that is. But here we are. Mr. Martinville will be turning in his grave. My friends, Agitators Anonymous, until next week.